alternatives to those law degrees. As somebody who entered academia after practicing law, I know that that path can be very rewarding, and there are other ways to find our passions. And three people who will tell us more about those journeys to their passions include Brian Farrell, a corporate associate at Kirkland & Ellis. You'll see how he is a round-trip example or a rebound lawyer, and how he had some alternative paths in between his return to the practice. Francesca Lisk, the EVP and Chief Talent Officer for Sotheby's. And finally, Jeremy Hamburg, the founder of My Best Social Life. Now, there's lots that we can learn about each of our participants. I'm going to start with a question that I'd like each of them to answer that includes, at what point did you decide that you might pivot out of a more traditional lawyer role into something that's law adjacent, or to return to a traditional lawyer's role after working in an adjacent industry, and why? What was it that prompted that move to consider alternatives? And Francesca, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Francesca Lisk. I'm Chief Talent Officer for Sotheby's. I've been with Sotheby's for 4 years nearly now. I started just before the pandemic. My decision to pivot actually wasn't one that I proactively made myself. It was one that was offered to me. The opportunity to work at Sotheby's came to me from a partner who I worked for at my law firm. I was an M&A lawyer at Hughes Hubbard & Reed for 10 years. I left Hughes Hubbard to join the Brooklyn Museum as their general counsel, and I was there for about 8 years. And I loved that job. I was so happy there. I worked with a great team for a great organization that was serving communities with a really important mission. But so the partner who I worked for at Hughes Hubbard called me with this opportunity at Sotheby's. And in fact, Hughes Hubbard represented Patrick Drahi, who acquired Sotheby's in 2019 in his acquisition. And I began speaking with the team here about a general counsel role because I'd been practicing law for 20 years at that point. And after a series of conversations, we started discussing the idea of having a lawyer take over talent and the strategic processes of aligning your team members with your business objectives. And for a global international company like ours, the complexities of looking at your greatest asset, which is your talent, but also a significant cost, and figuring out how to best leverage that asset. So after a series of conversations, very unexpectedly, I agreed that this would be an opportunity for me to sort of expand and learn a new aspect of a business and take my career in a different direction. And so that's how I wound up in this role.
Excellent. I wonder, Jeremy, if you can answer the same question. When did you start thinking that you might pivot out of your traditional legal representation role?
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy Hamburg. I'm the founder of My Best Social Life, and I'm the creator of the Social Life 360 program. And we empower adults with autism and neurodiverse brains to find community, make friends, start dating. And as much as that sounds like a complete 180 from being a lawyer, I always tell people winning over a jury of 12 and winning over a jury of 1 are not all that different. And I really do believe that. So I was a prosecutor in New York City starting in 2007. And I started working with the autism and neurodiverse community right around 2010. So I was doing them both simultaneously for a long time. I was a prosecutor for just shy of 7 years, and then I went over to JP Morgan Chase's litigation group, where I worked for just over 7 years, and I was doing My Best Social Life in the background for all of that time. And somewhere about, I don't know, I don't remember the exact year, but maybe midway through my legal career, one of my clients got married. And not only was I invited to his wedding, he actually asked me to be in his wedding. And I remember, going up to the under the marital canopy at the wedding and looking out at this, big group of people who were all here for this joyous occasion, and thinking to myself, I really don't want to look back on my life and count the number of motions I've won and trials I've done, but I want to count my life in terms of the number of relationships I'm responsible for and the number of weddings that I've attended. And so ever since then, and that was a while ago, I was on this path of managing being a lawyer and being a dating coach and social coach for people on the spectrum. And there were some significant changes going on in JP Morgan's legal department. And then the pandemic came. And so I moved out to California. I worked for Chase for a little while longer. And then in December of 2020, I went out on my own and I run this program full time. And now I have 3 employees, 2 of whom are on the spectrum themselves.
So I have to ask before we move on to Brian, how many relationships can you credit to your successful venture here so far?
The truth is, I don't know, because I've actually found out that some of my clients have gotten married and didn't even tell me, which is
Oh
a
my
shame,
goodness.
because I always tell people, if you get married, let me know. I will come to your wedding. And if I don't come, I'm going to give you a gift. So I really don't know. And the other thing is that, relationships look different sometimes for people who are neurodivergent or autistic. And I learned that sort of very early on in my career doing this type of coaching. I learned that what I view as friendship may be a relationship to someone else. So each person comes to our program with his or her own goals. Yeah, that's it.
I love that. And it reminds me of the people who are coming to Ex Judicata. They each have their own goals, and I hope they will take something from each of your experiences today on this webcast. Now, Brian, please tell us how you were a lawyer and then maybe lawyer adjacent and then a lawyer again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dean Roberts and Kim and Neil. It's a pleasure to be here today with the Ex Judicata family. So I have a bit of a strange story here. It's a round trip one. I'm currently a private equity M&A associate at Kirkland & Ellis. Before that, I was an investment banker at Piper Sandler in the technology group, where I focused on legal technology software. And then before that, I had a quick stint as an associate at Latham right out of law school, where I was doing M&A and general corporate work for them. So happy to talk about my experience, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And then in terms of why I did the round trip, I could start with why I went to investment banking initially. So I'd started thinking about a career on the investment side or more business side while I was at 2L in law school. Started taking coursework at the Booth School of Business at Chicago, as well as doing a bunch of self-study on the side, just because I had a prior career in corporate finance and wanted to consider all the options available at the time. Did what my parents would want me to do, right? Go get a JD, then they want you to take the bar and actually become a lawyer. So took the path of least resistance, went to Latham, got phenomenal experience in M&A group. But one thing I kind of didn't have a hold on was I'd never been on the investment side, particularly from a finance point of view. Didn't understand necessarily the motivations or rationales behind the deals. And I wanted to just understand a little bit more about how private equity sponsors and investment banks thought. At the time, leaving the law to go to banking, you usually come in as an analyst if you were to come out of an associate role at a law firm. I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to join as an associate at the banking level. And, if I had stayed in law for 5 or 6 years, probably would have rolled off in the same position at a bank. So just took the leap of faith and went right in. The other thing was I also had a significant amount of student loans, and I was able to pay those down a lot faster through an investment banking career than through law. A couple of years into investment banking, I got engaged. My priorities started to shift a little bit in terms of time. I will say the hours in investment banking are a lot more than big law, no matter where you're working in big law, I think. And I just wanted a more flexible lifestyle. And I also missed a lot of the legal work, the strategic thinking that comes along with being a lawyer, and had an opportunity to rejoin a firm in the next class year. So I didn't have to skip a beat there.
Outstanding. Let me start with you, Brian, with a follow-up question. As you were interviewing to be part of the investment banking world, how did your future colleagues view your legal experience when you were engaged in the interview process? And then once you were hired, is it something they saw as an asset for those who might be considering a switch, and how so?
Yep. So immediately they saw the value add in terms of just knowing how to run a process in an M&A transaction or other sort of capital markets deal. They were very skeptical of the numbers side of things. And that's despite me having worked in corporate finance before law school and being an economics major. As soon as you get the lawyer tag, the bankers kind of label you as that, and you need to prove them wrong. So I can, explain later on this webinar how I was able to do that. But I would say, there are positives and negatives having the lawyer tag, and they appreciate both sides of that.
Jeremy, when you left the practice in order to start your own business, and actually you were doing them both at the same time, that was quite a side hustle you had going on. But when you left the practice of law, did you leave it completely, or are there things that you took with you that you use every day in your new venture that you gained from your legal education?
So I think I have to start by saying I will not practice law anymore, and I don't practice law now. And I gave up my my bar membership in New York and California. So I burned the bridge completely. There will be no more. There will be no more legal advising in my life going forward. But I learned amazing things as a lawyer that I use all the time. When you are a coach or you run a business, contracts and agreements are a really big deal, and managing risk is a really big deal. And so we actually have a good number of our clients who have, at least one parent who's a lawyer who've looked at our client agreement, for example, and said, man, that's pretty darn good. That's a good client agreement, right? That covers you 7 ways from Sunday. And that's really important, right? Because running a business is hard enough if you're worrying about your downside and worrying about your risk. It certainly ramps up the anxiety. But I think also, particularly working, in-house at JP Morgan, I learned a lot about risk management. And so, a lot of the decisions that I make running this business are very, very well considered, and they're well considered because I understand the risk of taking them and the risk of not taking them. So even, for example, like, I'm on the East Coast right now. I live in California, but I'm on the East Coast visiting. And yesterday I took 2 meetings with law firms about the possibility of turning our for-profit corporation into a nonprofit, or having a nonprofit adjacent to the for-profit. And we had a family in our program whose son's life changed so drastically that they wanted to donate to us and offer scholarships to our program. And I think a lot of people would have just jumped at that opportunity and said, sure, just whatever needs to be done, let's do it. But this, we haven't even started a nonprofit yet because we're considering what to do, how to do it. And that's a lawyer thing, right? You don't just dive into the pool.
Well, you know which issues to spot, or you spot the issues, right? And then you know that you need some additional advice. Well, that's exciting, though, that you've had such great results for one of your clients, that their family is willing to donate and provide scholarships. Francesca, you were performing the duties of a lawyer or general counsel before you joined Sotheby's, and now you are an EVP and Chief Talent Officer. What's it like when the senior leadership team starts talking about legal issues and the general counsel starts giving advice? I mean, is there a tendency to want to jump in? How do you keep yourself in your lane, or do you? Maybe you merge.
There was at first. When I first joined, I definitely had a bit of an identity crisis. When I was in the room with our executive team and legal issues came up, I was so tempted to provide my opinion. But that wasn't my job anymore. And so it definitely took a while for me to get used to that. And I didn't always agree with the opinion of our general counsel, although he's excellent and I respect him very much and we're quite close. You don't always agree because a lot of the law is in the gray. as we know, in our judgment calls and risk assessments. And I had to learn to get comfortable with, as you say, staying in my lane and letting our general counsel be the lawyer in the room. And over time, even though I still very much think like a lawyer, and I think I approach my work very much through the legal lens, over time, though, I have grown accustomed to being able to pick up the phone and call our general counsel and say, hey, here's an issue. What do you think about this? Because we speak the same language, we're able to have a really fruitful conversation on a number of different topics that like aren't necessarily even only legal. So it definitely was a learning curve. There are times where I still will veer into the legal lane, but I very much appreciate having his partnership and his guidance and being able to sort of defer to his expertise at times.
I'm sure he appreciates that.
Very much so.
Now, with the role that you play as Chief Talent Officer, you indicated that there was discussion of how that might benefit from having a lawyer in the position and that you were sought after for the role. What in your day-to-day duties as the Chief Talent Officer for this multinational corporation, do you utilize your legal skills and how in this work? And for our listeners, are there things that they might think about from their legal practice experience that could transition well to a Chief Talent Officer position in another corporation?
Absolutely. You are constantly problem solving. You're constantly figuring out how to get to yes, right? So as a lawyer, you're very much trained from the beginning that like the answer is only no when it really has to be no. You're partnering with your client in order to help them achieve their objectives within a legal framework. And it's very similar here. You know, you're looking at issues and you're problem solving for the best outcome. And the circumstances may not always be the best or the simplest or the easiest to resolve. But so you're doing constant risk assessments, you're doing cost benefit analyses, and you're looking at the circumstances and choosing a solution, the best solution for the circumstances that you have. So that, you know, the strategic bigger picture thinking, the issue spotting, which you just mentioned, navigating different personalities. People have different approaches to the same issue, and being able to convene groups, listen to people, understand their objectives, and find a path forward among different viewpoints is very key to this role. Being able to drive teams to accomplish your business objectives, which when your objectives aren't always necessarily so clearly aligned with individual objectives. And so how do you solve for that? How do you incentivize people to perform in a certain way, to deliver a business objective, which may be cognitively dissonant in some instances with individual objectives? So a lot of this skill, or the skills that are required of this job, really do come from the analytical skills that you develop when you're servicing clients, when you're servicing partners, when you're reviewing agreements, when you're issue spotting on deals. And understanding, for me, I was an M&A lawyer, so understanding how a business operates and how all of the elements of the business work together and how dependent you are on your people, on your processes, on your systems, on your working capital, on all of these things hang together in the operation of a business. And that's very much a vocabulary I developed when I was a lawyer.
So as a follow-up to that, we had a question that asked if you had HR experience before you went into this role. And if not, if you were given kind of the space to learn that while you were performing the role.
I really didn't, honestly. HR at the Brooklyn Museum reported to me, but it was purely a transactional function. Like, and the reason that it reported to me was mostly because of investigations that I had to do in my legal capacity. But it really, like, in terms of like the transactional aspects of HR, benefits and payroll, it's still to this day, that is not my expertise whatsoever. But because I was the museum's lawyer for so long, and we were 350 people, I had counseled so many of our staff on various issues over the years that you develop that certain level of trust with your clients. And as a result of that, I was able to translate complex business objectives like our strategic planning, issues that we were discussing in our board meetings, difficult crises that we needed to handle, PR issues. I was sort of tasked with translating those issues for the broader teams. And as a result of that responsibility, I eventually became the chief of staff. And that chief of staff role, where you're serving as the bridge between your trustees and your director and your president and the rest of the team, prepared me for this role, which is quite similar in many ways.
Thank you. Brian, while you left Big Law and went into investment banking, you did come back, and there are people I know who are participating in this webcast who are in Big Law now and maybe thinking of a departure. But I imagine there are also people who are watching who might not have considered Big Law, but might after hearing more about your experience. I know they're certainly hiring in Big Law. So if you would share for those who are listening and might not have a Big Law position currently, why they might consider it, and if they would like to pursue such an opportunity, how best to position themselves for it.
Absolutely. So Big Law, what I missed the most about it coming from banking was, how, I guess, effective everyone in Big Law is at writing, or so it seems, at communication, at a lot of the soft skills. And also the amount of time that my partners and senior associates take to mentor me. The banking world was a lot more sink or swim type of mentality. So I think Big Law is a great place to learn and to start a legal career. I know even at my first year at Latham, the training was absolutely phenomenal, with tons of structured programming. Seemed like every day, you had course or assignment to develop your skill set. Both on the hard skills and soft side of things. So I think you can't really go wrong with a firm. And a lot of firms these days are flexible in terms of what practice group you want to join. So at Kirkland, they don't make people select until their second year. And at Latham, I had the option if I wanted to do dual litigation and transactional work. So a pretty phenomenal opportunity. In terms of preparing for the interviews, I really think the best way to figure things out is just call a bunch of people who have worked at that firm or who currently work at the firm. A good mix, will get you a breadth of opinions. You get people that may speak more candidly that have left the firm. And then, drilling down into the practice groups that you're interested in, looking at any publicly available resources on transactions or anything that they've worked on, and just see if, it's a good cultural fit as well. And I think the cultural aspect is a big part. Some people will say every firm is the same. Maybe they say different things on the website, but once you start, they're the exact same. And having been at two different firms, I can tell you that culturally they're vastly different places, but both phenomenal law firms to work at. So just got to do your homework a little bit.
Well, I think that's excellent advice, no matter what opportunity you might be considering outside of your current role, to do your homework and to reach out to people who have familiarity with the place that you're considering applying to. So Jeremy, Brian brought up an interesting point. I'm a big fan of mentoring. We have some very good programs here at the law school. Mentoring certainly is available in firms. Francesca, I imagine there are some people on the senior leadership team that help mentor you or that you help mentor. Jeremy, how did you fill that need when you're out on your own, starting your own business? And for you in particular, your business is so different than those that are out there. It's not like you can call up anybody else who's servicing the population you serve. So how do you find mentors or advice when you need it in running your own business?
I hire mentors, right? Because if you're going to go into the coaching business, you best darn appreciate the value of coaching. And if you think that that you know everything, you're probably not going to be a very good coach. So I knew, I grinded out this business for years and years and years, the way that most coaches do. I'd find a client and I would charge them for an hour of my time and, try to keep that going and find another client. And it was honestly, it was a real grind. And what was really kind of disappointing to me was that when I looked at replacing my, JP Morgan legal salary, the amount of grinding I would have to do it was just pretty awful. And so I really, for a while, just kind of came to this conclusion that unless there's a better way to run this business, I really won't be able to, to ever have it more than be a side hustle because of the golden handcuffs of the legal career. And then, like, one day, I mean, this is probably around 2016, 2017, I just had this like 3 a.m. epiphany, like, oh my God, my buddy is in B school, and they learn using case studies. And I thought to myself at 3 a.m, oh my goodness, there must be case studies of coaches who make, real money, not just, like $75 an hour, right? Or whatever. And so I started doing some research, and, I found an outfit that, that has a mentor for marketing, that has a mentor for the sales process, that has a mentor for the coaching process. And they put all of these different mentors under one roof. And that's really sort of how I was able to make the transition, knowing that I would be able to one day replace my salary. Because, when you run your own business, you're not, especially a coaching business, you're not just a coach. You're the head coach, you're the head marketing officer, you're the head salesperson. And so I got myself a mentor for every one of those things so that I could be competent at it. And then I went out and I hired people to do the marketing and to do the sales, who themselves went through the same coaching program as I did. So at least I knew who their coaches were. And that's been working out phenomenally well for the business too.
I'm very impressed with how much homework that you all have done before you took the leap. And so I'm going to assume that would be some of the first pieces of advice you would give to those who want to leave the practice of law or their current position. What other advice would you give to those who are considering leaving the law or pivoting from their current legal position? And let's start with Brian.
All right. So my advice may be a little industry specific here, but if you're looking at a career in finance, in a finance role, you definitely got to study a lot, especially if you don't have a finance background or accounting background going into it. Coming from the law, the kind of assumption in the financial world is that you're afraid of numbers. That's why you became a lawyer. Which, couldn't be further from the truth for a lot of folks, but that's the stigma there. So, while you're in law school, some of the things you can do are, if your school also has a business school, and you can take classes there for law school credit, I highly recommend doing that. Just meeting folks in the business program and networking there. At my law school, a lot of consulting firms and investment banks did come to campus for recruiting, in addition to law firms. And I made the rounds with those folks, even though I didn't end up applying, but those connections came in handy later down the road. And then just really following the industry, and getting familiar with a particular sector. So for example, I really like technology and want to do software investment banking. And the set of metrics that they use to value those companies are vastly different from what you would need to know for industrial companies or utilities or things like that. And when you go into the interview process, they're going to expect you to know all the specific knowledge to whatever group you're interviewing with. So really just, studying up, reading the Wall Street Journal, following a particular sector or type of business will really help you. And then also on the flip side, if you're already in the law, trying to get deals or transactions that you can easily position as relevant to a financial services type of role, and not just paying attention to the legal aspects, but asking questions to your partners or senior associates, like, why are these parties doing this deal? why did they decide to sell this product instead of another one? Why are they going into this geography, right? Just trying to get a more holistic understanding of the process. And I think all those things will help you a lot trying to make a move.
Great, thank you. Now, Francesca, you were in a job that you loved and you were not considering other opportunities. Some of the people watching may be in a similar situation. And what advice do you have for them if you're approached and you're not really interested? What should they do before they summarily turn that down?
Sure. Well, let me say first that I've always felt that the education that I got at my law firm was exceptional and prepared me incredibly well to be an in-house lawyer as well as to be a business executive. Everything that I did, from document review in the very early days of my career to 3 o'clock in the morning disclosure schedules to writing an indemnification provision, like everything that I did, even though at the time it may have seemed mind-numbing, you were exhausted, the hours were long, I literally rely on all of those remedial skills that I developed in the early years of my career. So that's one. It's really important, a couple of things. It's really important that you're the agent of your own career. So you network, you spot the opportunities when they arise. Do not sleepwalk through your days, even though sometimes you feel like exhausted and it's never-ending workload. I think it's really important for you to know that no one is going to make your career happen for you. You really have to make it happen for yourself. And it is a combination of opportunity, obviously, and hard work. So for me, the other thing that always has driven me in my career is you get one life, one career, and you have to go with where your passion lies. Ultimately, for me, that was in the art world. And, I was an art history major in college. I was actually an intern at Sotheby's between my junior and senior year. It was when I was at Sotheby's that I decided to pursue law school, because it was the commodification of art and the commercial art market rather than sort of the academic study of art. That was really interesting to me and exciting to me. So I went to law school, I went to Cornell, and I decided to choose a law firm that had an art law practice. And so even though most of my days were filled with drafting purchase agreements and ancillary documents, I spent the limited free time that I had doing pro bono work for museums, building a transactional art practice for clients who were also collectors. And that just grew. And one of my clients was the Brooklyn Museum. And the work for them started really narrow with, an exhibition agreement. And then it just sort of expanded and expanded and expanded until they decided they wanted to bring me in-house. And when this opportunity arose, it was similar, I loved being a lawyer, still like the practice of law. I would never say that I would never return to it. But I love this business. And I love the people that I met in this business. Remember when the partner who I worked for, Hughes Hubbard, called me with this, he said, just take the meeting, because I resisted at first because I was very happy where I was. And I said, oh, I'm not really interested. I love my job. And he said, just take the meeting. And when I met this team, I really loved them. And I loved their vision for this business. And I got really excited about the possibility of trying something new and building my skills. And so it really was a leap of faith. I hemmed and hawed about it a little bit. And do I really not want to be a lawyer anymore? And am I going to have this identity crisis? But ultimately, my gut was telling me you have one life, to take the risk, go after your passion. The art world was my passion. So here I am. So let your passion ultimately guide you. Value the skills that you're getting, because they are valuable and they are going to help inform your career going forward. But let your passion drive you. Excellent
advice. Jeremy, I want to ask you, when I hear Francesca talk about a leap of faith, I don't know that you could have more of a leap of faith than jumping into your own business. So please, for those who are listening who have similar hopes and dreams of running their own business in something related to law or not, please give some advice on what they should be thinking about before they take the leap of faith.
For me, it was all about proving the concept before I took the leap of faith. I am not the type of person who comes up with an idea, burns the bridge that I have, leaps at the idea, and just hopes and prays that it's going to work. That's just not me. And frankly, we're all lawyers. I don't think that's most of us here, right? We look at the end goal, we find a path to the end goal, we manage our risk to the end goal, and that's exactly what I did. I've been now coaching just shy of 14 years, but I've been doing this as my sole income for since December of 20. So we're 2 years through, something like that. And in all the years before that, I was figuring out, what's the business model? How can I make it work? Let me get enough clients to prove that this is the right way to go. So that when I negotiated my exit from JP Morgan Chase, I knew what I was doing, right? I knew what the business was going to look like. It was going to be a larger version of what I had already developed. And so for me, that's just the way my brain works. Like I cannot take a blind leap of faith. I took a very calculated leap of faith, and I'm glad I did, because I loved being a prosecutor, but being a prosecutor in New York City doesn't really pay the bills. And then I went to JP Morgan, and I loved being at JP Morgan. I helped start an AML focused unit, and then I was the liaison between law enforcement and our worldwide subpoena practice, and I did some litigation. I loved all of it, but as we're having this discussion right this moment, I can see on my phone that there's a young man who's my client on the West Coast who is going back and forth online with a young lady and doesn't really know what to do. And it's pretty darn cool to know that this young man, who's just a really great human being, but struggles with social skills and reading social cues, he's coming to me and asking, what do I do next so that I have an opportunity maybe to land this date? And that makes for a pretty fun day.
That sounds pretty amazing. There was a question in the Q&As about your business model and what services you offer. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I offer one service and one service only, which is a program called Social Life 360. And we provide our clients with an online community of our other clients. To the extent that their parents want to be part of an online community, we provide their parents with one too, because a lot of parents, whose adults are neurodiverse or autistic, have never been able to talk with someone else who understands their journey. So we provide our clients and our clients' families with online communities. We now are big enough that we have regional communities. So our New York people get together and hang out. Our Philly people get together and hang out. Our SoCal people do it. Our Texas people do it. Our Bay Area people do it, which is wonderful. But the heart of the program is 12 weeks of coaching on the A to Z of how to be more confident, how to understand who you're compatible with, how the skills to go out into literally to do the research, to find the communities and groups and events that you can go to meet people. We go deep into how to approach people and talk to them, and then how to make future plans with them and follow through on it, which are all the things that an autistic or neurodiverse person might be struggling with. And so we do that through a combination of asynchronous training videos, private coaching, and group coaching. There's no program like it anywhere in the world, which is why I also felt confident going out on my own. I wasn't copycatting something that's already out there. I literally developed my own curriculum and my own program. And other than that, the only other thing we do is we go around the country and around the world right now, sometimes in person, sometimes by Zoom, and we will talk to organizations. We'll talk to their members about how to live their best social life. We'll talk to their members' parents about how to help their young adults live their best social lives. And we've even gotten into training, organizations employees on best practices for integrating and communicating with people who are neurodivergent or autistic. So we run the program, and we do some free workshops around the world.
It's fascinating. And to go back to passion, Francesca was able to incorporate her passion into her work. I'm going to ask you about passion in a minute, Brian, but before I leave you, Jeremy, how did this become your passion? What started your interest in working with this group of people? And I have to say, the program sounds amazing, and post-pandemic could probably be useful to a whole lot of people who are not on the spectrum. But just throw that out there for you now.
It's true,
model.
and you're so right. And one of the things that we've done in the last 2 years is we've actually given parents and family members access to the same trainings, ostensibly so they can help their young adult, with the skills that we're teaching them. But we've actually gotten feedback from parents and family members that they've learned so much from it. And we even had a couple out in Wyoming where they said that it's changed their marriage, because we're not teaching autistic skills. We're teaching human skills using formulas and diagrams and step-by-step processes that allow the neurodivergent brain to better absorb what we're teaching, so they can go out into the world, see how the social world works, and then be a participant in it. So we're teaching human skills sort of in a neurodivergent way. And I had no intention of ever doing this. I started a Jewish young professionals organization in New York City many, many, many years ago. And, we would have 150, 200 people come to our events, and they all sort of wanted to meet each other, and they just kind of sucked at it, to pardon my French. Like, they were coming, but they weren't good at meeting one another. And so folks started asking me, like, hey, how do you walk into a room by yourself and you walk out with a gaggle? And I said, I have no clue. And they said, well, you better figure it out and start teaching us. And so I took 3 years to kind of figure out what makes people magnetic, what makes them want to be with one another. I also learned that it's very similar to my trial training that I was getting as a young prosecutor, right? How much of being a magnetic person is, dressing well, projecting confidence, telling a good story, asking good questions, being a good listener. It goes back to winning over a jury of 12 is not very different than winning over a jury of 1. So the science that I was sort of learning on my own was very much comporting with what I was learning as a prosecutor. And so I went to the Jewish Community Center in Manhattan. I said, hey guys, I want to do a workshop for socially awkward Jews. And they're like, do we have to pay you for it? And I'm like, okay, not the first time. And so I started running programming at the JCC, teaching people how to be just better, more confident versions of themselves. And unbeknownst to me, the JCC had 3 special needs organizations under its roof. So a lot of the people who were coming to my workshops were neurodivergent and autistic. And slowly but surely, those organizations just started hiring me directly. And I realized that there's this amazing population of human beings who are smart and capable, and but they have that missing piece in their life, which is the social piece. And there are plenty of therapists and whatever out there who are, trying to fill that gap. And I'm sure some of them are having success, but it's not on a scale that's really moving the world forward. And I thought to myself, man, this is going to take a tenacious New York lawyer. And I have been thinking about the formulas and the processes and the diagrams and the schematics that underlie the social world every day for the last 14 years.
Well, it's obviously paying off for your clients and that young man who you're going to help as soon as we get off this.
Yes, that's correct.
So Brian, tell us about what your passions are and how they relate to the technology sector that you've gone into, or the investment banking and finance world. How did you determine which area of law you wanted to go into, and what would you advise a young lawyer to consider when trying to choose a path?
Absolutely. So in undergrad, I studied economics, was very into just quantitative things, really more focused on the investing world. But I went to a liberal arts school, so there wasn't a hard finance or accounting major there. But over the years, working at a tech company as an intern in the past, and having a lot of touch with General Electric Digital, where I had a role before, I really got interested in just the software world, particularly vertical software. So legal technology is an example of that. You could have accounting software, right? Basically software designed for a particular industry or purpose that. And the best way for me to parlay that, I thought, was, going into the legal profession. As an investment banker, you look at a lot of companies, you maybe pitch them to private equity sponsors, give them ideas, but you're primarily, at least where I was working with sell side engagements, so helping to sell one company over a pretty long stretch of time. In law, on the flip side, you get to work with a lot of banks, a lot of sponsors, and you get to work on a lot of transactions and see how they're structured, see the deal terms in there. You get to see the economics. And for me, it's just more interesting being in the law world and to see that type of volume of software transactions in the space that I'm really passionate about. And that kind of led me back to big law after a few years in banking.
Great. All of you, I imagine, have done your share of networking. People who are considering a change, or young lawyers or new grads, all have to make connections in the field that they hope to be a part of. So while we have an expert on the line with Jeremy, who's going to tell us what he tells his coaching clients, I'm going to use him last. We're going to ask him last. But Francesca, can you start by sharing what you did to make sure that your networks were fully formed in order to support your professional and personal endeavors?
Yeah, your relationships are everything. At least mine were to my career. Every opportunity I have had has not come from me proactively looking for a job in 20 plus years of my career. It's all come from conversations that I've had with relationships that I've established, whether it's the partners who I worked for, or the associates that I worked with and grew up with at my law firm, who are now either partners at Hughes Hubbard, or partners at other law firms, or counsel or general counsel at companies, or the people who I worked with at the museum, the trustees who I worked with at the museum, and everybody who I work with here, frankly. Like, your relationships are everything. And so no relationship is too small to cultivate. It does require effort. It does take a lot of time and commitment, and it's something that you have to want to do. And even myself, who generally, obviously, I run the people function here, like people, and definitely like interacting with people. There are times where you don't necessarily feel like having to go to breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but it's so incredibly important to your career to maintain those relationships. And whenever I have the opportunity to invest, to give somebody advice, to create a job opportunity for somebody, I always try to take that opportunity, not only because I genuinely care about helping people grow and achieve their aspirations, but because it comes back around. So invest in your relationships. It is incredibly important to your career. Absolutely.
Brian?
Yep. So totally agree with everything Francesca said. Just add a little tidbit from my angle. So when you're going out and networking with people, I think a very useful technique is at the end of the call, ask them, hey, who are some other people you'd recommend that I reach out to? And would you be willing to make an introduction? And just from doing that, you can rapidly expand the kind of number of people in your network and the scope of it. And then, just getting creative when you're searching online for people to contact. Personally, I started with alums from my undergrad or law school, and then start branching out beyond just the specific school you're in to maybe the business school or engineering school, or whatever you're interested in, and then just taking it from there.
Well, great advice. And I always tell our students here, it is the rarest of persons who will not take a call or an email or a LinkedIn message. When people are asked to help, they help because they're flattered that you asked, and they want to pay it forward. Jeremy, how do you advise your clients on networking?
I don't advise my clients on networking, but I will talk about my own, because I do agree with Francesca and Brian. And I'll tell a quick story. My dad, my sister, and I all went to the same college. And about a year ago, 2 years ago, we went to like a joint all years reunion, and I had a blast. And my brother-in-law came up to me sort of at the end of the reunion, and he said, "Jeremy, you networked every minute of every day at that reunion." He said, "I've never seen someone so on message as you are at all times with every person." And I don't even think about networking anymore. I happen to love people, thank goodness, but I take every meeting with every person. I take the opportunity to meet any person who will hear me. I will talk to a fire hydrant if I have to. And I am relentlessly on message about who I am, and who I want to meet. And it's been everything to me. In fact, I talked earlier about taking 2 meetings yesterday in Manhattan. One of them was with a law firm that I didn't know existed. Why? Because someone I knew introduced me to someone else. I got on a Zoom with that woman. We talked for an hour. I set up a workshop that I'll be doing for her organization, and she made mention of her husband, who's a lawyer with nonprofit experience, and I asked for an introduction to her husband, and that's who I met yesterday. I'm always looking for the next person to meet. Nothing may come out of it, but I may be able to help them, or they may be able to help me, or worse comes to worse, they go in the Rolodex, so that if someone comes to me for something I don't do, they're in my Rolodex and I can pass them along. I'm relentless at it. I take 2 to 3 meetings with people in adjacent industries every single day. Relentless. And I try to send them business if I can. I try to have them collaborate with me if that's the right move. I ask them to introduce me to whoever the next person is I need to meet, and I do the same thing for them. And it's a lot of work, but as Francesca said, your relationships are everything. So, networking, I think it's a bad word, or at least it has a negative connotation. I happen to love it, but it's a second job, and I would say it's probably 75% of the reason why my business was profitable, within a few months.
All right, great. We have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask each of you for about a minute to give some parting words of advice for those who are listening and thinking about leaving their legal career or their current job in law. And Brian, why don't we start with you?
Yep. So say if you're thinking about leaving the law, congratulations. There are a lot of excellent opportunities out there in various fields. Just make sure you do your homework, and you're certain, or you've de-risked the opportunity before you leave. And if you're a young attorney, at least, and you're not certain if you'd want to go back or permanently leave, I highly recommend staying up to date on your continuing education, keeping that license active, because it's a whole lot harder to go back to law when you have to sit for the bar exam again. But the world is your oyster there.
Thank you. Jeremy?
When I look back on my life, I want to be able to say that I did what I enjoyed and that I made an impact in this world. And if you are worried that you're going to look back on your life and not have a sense of fulfillment, it's time to start thinking about something else.
Francesca?
I had my torts professor in law school would always use the refrain, "There's no such thing as a free lunch." And it really is the truth. There just is no such thing as a free lunch. And you need to invest in your career. You need to do the work. Sometimes you need to do work that you don't necessarily enjoy. But I assure you that the skills that you're getting at your law firm or in your legal practice will serve you outside of your legal practice. And there will be a certain point where you will come across an opportunity and you will know, this is the right opportunity for me. You're going to know it in your gut. Pursue your passion. The passion doesn't come for free. Invest in your career and the core skills. But ultimately, like I said, you have one life, and you ultimately have to go with what you are passionate about. And you don't want to look back on your life and say, I worked really hard. You want to look back on your life and say, I made an impact and I did something that brought me joy.
Thank you, Francesca, Brian, and Jeremy, for a really engaging conversation. And Neil, I turn it back to you. You're on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to thank the panel. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Francesca. Thank you, Dean. And thank everybody for listening. We really appreciate your having given us an hour. Thank you. Bye.